There is so much God wants to do in this time and in this season. But unfortunately, so many of us limit the hand of God in our lives. And today, God is saying, it is time to make room for me. It is time to enlarge your capacity for me. For it is only when we make room for God, God is able to manifest in the way He wants to. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. If you're here for the first time, I am Ojane Peters and this is Holy Grail Network. I know I've taken a long break, but I promise you I will be consistent from now hence. Let's dive into our discussion for today. And today we're saying, make room for God in your lives. There are so many of us who would relate to what I'm going to say today. We have prayed for God to manifest in a way we have never seen before. We have even professed that God, I'm yielded to you. I want you to show up. And all of this nice stuff, we have given ourselves to God, but we don't see God manifesting in our lives in the way we want Him to. And the reason is not because God isn't ready to manifest. The reason God hasn't manifested in the way we've been hoping for Him to is because we have not created space or created room for God in our lives. I want to start off by asking a question. Who is priority in your life? Who is number one? Because the very things that take priorities in your life will reveal how much space they have in your life. And if God isn't number one, it means He doesn't have center stage. And one good thing about God is God only manifests in certain ways when we give Him all. We all can go back to the story of the children of Israel. These were men who God saved mightily from the children from Egypt. But these very people God brought out by a mighty hand turned to other gods. And each time they're in trouble, they remember God and they turn back to God. But God is saying, if you're hot today, cold tomorrow, I cannot do anything with you. God is saying, yes, you are saying I'm yielded to you, but I don't see commitment. Making room for God is being more committed to God, making God first in your life and making God priority in your life. But if you want to see God in a way you haven't seen, you have to give Him what you cannot give any other person or any other thing. The reason why God isn't manifesting is because they are idols. There are things we are more committed to than we are to God. I'm not saying committed to money or other stuff. I'm saying it might even be a family member. It might be your family. It might be your job. And those things take priority in your life. Just very recently, I was reflecting on my life. I couldn't post for a while. I haven't posted in like 3-4 weeks. And the reason I haven't posted is because I've been saying or claiming to be busy. But I have created time for my job. I have created time for other people. I've created time to do other things. But this is something I'm doing for God and I couldn't even commit to doing it. And that just shows my commitment to God. Because every day I will wake up and I have time to work my 9 to 5. But when it comes to doing God's business, I'm suddenly very busy. And this is the same thing for many people. We have time to do other things, but when it comes to spending time in God's presence, we no longer have time. And God will not show up in a certain way if we have not made Him priority. And God will put the children of Israel and release them into the hand of the devil. And when they're in trouble, they suddenly remember there is this God we can go back to. God doesn't want us to play games with Him. He wants to be number one. There is a parable I want to use to explain this thing, and that's the parable of the rich fool. This was a man. Jesus was telling a story. And this conversation or this story started with someone asking him a question. Jesus was teaching a group of people and suddenly someone in the audience lifted up their hands and they're like, Master, please ask my brother to give me my own share of the inheritance. And Jesus says, who made me judge over you? And he started to say, watch out and be on guard against all kinds of greed, because life doesn't consist in an abundance of possession. And Jesus said this, and He says to everyone, watch out and be on guard. He says, because life isn't just about possessions. Life is what more than possessions. But many of us have limited God to just giving us things and giving us possessions. But Jesus is saying life is worth more than this. Because if we cannot create room for God, if we cannot create time for God or space for God in our lives, we would be giving to this greed. And he says, be intentional, and every day intentionally watch out and watch the things you do and watch the things that matter. Because although this guy was in a congregation listening to Jesus teach a message, he was more concerned about Jesus speaking to his brother. Because maybe the brother was a follower of Jesus and he knew so well that if I could just go and hear this man speak and have an opportunity to ask him to speak to my brother, he would speak and my brother would give me that which is mine. He wasn't paying attention to the teaching Jesus was doing that day. He was more concerned about his brother not giving him his own share. And many of us are more concerned about the money, about the bills, about so many things, and we have not created time for God. Although we go to church, although we read our Bibles, those are just religious things. We are not committed to knowing this Jesus. And today my encouragement is, in as much as we're doing all that because it's a necessity, God is more than that. Jesus should be priority. We shouldn't play messages, go to church, or just hoping that God would meet a need. It should be because God wants to do mighty things in our lives. God is committed to you. God wants you to be committed to him as well. And Jesus carries on after saying this profound statement that life is what more isn't just about possessions or abundance. He goes on to tell the parable of the rich fool. And Jesus started to say there was a story of a man. This rich man had an abundant harvest. So he had sowed seed and he gained more than he imagined. And Jesus carried on to say that this man began to think to himself, I don't have room enough to store this harvest. I don't have space enough to store this thing. So it means that the man sowed seed as he had always done. Jesus introduced him as a rich man. So he wasn't just getting wealth for the first time. This is something he had always done. So, but this time around, he planted seed, but he gained more than he had ever gained. And unfortunately, instead of this man to focus on why did I have this possession or why did I get so much harvest, he was more concerned about creating room for the harvest. And yes, he's done the right thing. He broke his van and the man started to speak to himself. So he's still thinking in his heart and he starts to say, this is what I will do. I will tear down my barns and I will build bigger ones. There I will store my surplus grain. And he's still thinking and he says, and I will say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy. Eat, drink, and be merry. There is something I want to point out to you today. He started by thinking to himself. Everything we do in life begins with our thoughts and begins with our mind. It means that our commitment to God will begin in our mind. There is a drive that I will just attribute this to driving a vehicle. If you do have a car and you're out of petrol, that car's never going to move. It doesn't matter how much you try to switch on the ignition, it wouldn't go because it doesn't have petrol. And even if you're moving and you run out of petrol, that car will stop and come to a standstill. Desire for God is as a petrol in a car. You can claim to be all out for God, but if there is no desire, you wouldn't go anywhere. This man had the right thought. He's like, there's no room for this harvest. But instead of going to God and asking God, why have you given me so much? He suddenly forgot the God of the harvest. Who knows? He sowed his seed and even prayed for God to give him increase, and God had answered that prayer. But this man suddenly turned on himself and he starts to think, I have enough stored up, but God gave him that for a very reason. And if you read on in the parable, God says, tonight your life will be required because you are a fool. I gave you something, and instead of using that for me, instead of creating room for me, you have created room for this harvest and taken me out of the harvest. God is a God of harvest, and everything God will give you, from your giftings to your skill and everything you can do in life, you are only a steward. And God wants you to use that to serve his very purpose. The reason this man's life was required of him because he took God out of the abundance. He took God out of the equation. He created room for the harvest and created no room for God. And because God could no longer act in this man's life, God says there is no point in living. Let's be conscious of this fact that the very life we live is God who's giving us the privilege. So many people were hoping to be alive today, but unfortunately they're not, but you are. And the very reason is because God wants to do something through your life. I heard something very recently and it stayed with me ever since. In your story, someone else's story. In your abundance is someone else's abundance. In your blessings is someone else's blessing. Look at Abraham. He was blessed, and because of Abraham, we all can partake of his blessings because he yielded to God. In you yielding to God is someone else's testimony, is someone else's encounter to God, but we take God out of the equation and we focus on other things. I'm just encouraging us. Let's turn to God completely. Let's make him priority in our lives. You are gathering. Yes, you are doing so much, but God has enabled you to do that because he has a plan for you. And let's not take God out of the equation. Let's make him the center. Because God isn't going to take the good things you want. He just wants to know you are committed to him. Please go back to God. Do not be like the rich fool who lost his life and who died prematurely. He couldn't even enjoy the very blessing God gave to him because he was so centered on himself. Please, let's be centered on God. God wants to spend time and fellowship with you. God wants you to show him that he is number one, and this is done on a daily basis. Every day, make room for God. And remember what I said, desire is the fuel, is the petrol that takes you on to knowing God and loving God more. We all want more from God, but God also wants more from you. And when you show your commitment to God, God will show his commitment back. Each time the children of Israel will realize their mistake and go back to God crying and wailing, God would say something. God will show and reassure he is committed to them. Please stay committed to God. Please stay hungry for God. Do not let life or the things of life cheat you out of what God has created you for. In you are many souls or many lives. And I just want to end by saying this. If you have left God, please go back to him. God is ever loving and he's ever ready to have you back in his arms. God wants to show you so much and do so much through your life, but you must open up your heart for God. And you must be intentional about creating room and time for God. Spend more time in his presence. Spend more time. Be hungry, genuine hunger for God. Because God sees our heart. He doesn't care about the things we're doing. Men could be moved by those things, but it doesn't move God. God is only moved when we give him all. Please give God all today. And I hope this word has blessed you. If it has, please make sure to share this video. Please like, please subscribe to this YouTube channel. I know I've taken a long break, but I'm back and I'll be posting videos once every week. And I hope you have been blessed. Please make sure to share this to someone. Stay blessed.